It's good to see everyone. Good to be here. I think I was the only one who sustained an injury yesterday at Kennywood. It's a really bizarre one, but I have this weird red mark all over my arm. I got bit by something, and it's really infected or something. So if I lose my arm, you can kind of see the red through there. So I'm blaming DP. Where's DP? I thanked you earlier, now I'm throwing you under the bus. And I'm saying it's your fault if I lose my arm. No, it's, I don't know. I'm not allergic to anything that I know of, but apparently I am. So I have no idea what bit me, but it got me good. Anyway, our theme this year is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. Yesterday was kind of a somber day for our nation as we remembered the 20-year anniversary of the thousands of people who lost their lives due to terrorist attacks. I think if one word can kind of sum up that day from 20 years ago, it would be sacrifice. Or maybe another one is heroism. People who stepped in and neighbors helped neighbors, and the country really pulled together in a time of crisis. And just the outpouring of love and commitment and sacrifice and honor and treating neighbors with care and respect, that lasted for a while. And I think we've kind of strayed from that as a nation. There was an interview that a reporter did, Heather Sells. She's a friend, and she interviewed my mom and a couple other people. And one of the guys is Chuck Wagner, and Chuck said, 20 years ago we were a different nation, and I missed the way that we were. He said, we were not Republicans or Democrats, we were not divided as a nation. He said, we were Americans and we came together. We came together for God and for neighbor. And he said, we've really strayed from that, and I miss those days. The question is, can we get it back? I think that's kind of a rhetorical question. I think it's a resounding yes, but it's up to us. We're talking about, also, I introduced last week, a process for this congregation of loving our neighbors, loving God, and serving others. If we are not moving as Christians, we are stagnated. Stagnation is never good. So we need to move people. We need to move into the neighborhood. We need to love our neighbors. We need to do things, even fun things like yesterday, a Kennywood Day. Next Saturday, or this coming Saturday, we have a pig roast. Please come to that. There are mountains of food. That's going to be out at the Gross's barn. Thank you guys again for the hospitality of opening up that place for us. But that's a good time to invite your neighbors, to genuinely invite people who are not plugged into God's church. Loving neighbors and then moving them to here, to worship, loving God. And then moving all of us into the neighborhood where we serve our neighbors, serve those in need. It's not difficult, it's not complicated, but we get wrapped up in the day-to-day life, and sometimes we lose focus. The story today out of Scripture is a story that moved Jesus. There are stories in Scripture, in the Gospels, where Jesus was moved, and I think this is one of those stories. I don't think Jesus was just using this as a lesson. I think Jesus was legitimately moved by the person in this story. Jacob read for us, and we're going to go back and read this again. It was the widow's offering. And then we're going to read this, and then we're going to provide some padding in front and then behind it to give some context to this, because this is not a story that survives on its own. Mark puts this in context, and we're going to look at that today. The widow's offering. And he, that is Jesus, sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. It's kind of an interesting scene, because I don't think Jesus was doing what other people do, where maybe they look around and they're just being nosy, and they want to know who's giving and who's not. I don't think Jesus was doing that. I think Jesus was observing people. He was sitting back, he was watching, and many rich people put in large sums. And a poor widow came up and put in 2 small copper coins, which make up a penny. The word that's used for that is it's a term that means basically 1/64th of a day's wage. They translated it a penny because it's just kind of awkward and clunky to say 1/64th of a day's wage. So she put these 2 copper coins in, it makes up a penny, and he called his disciples to him and said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." Now, I don't think Jesus called his disciples over because he was like, "All right, I'm going to teach you a lesson, and we're going to look at this poor widow, and I'm going to use her as an object lesson to teach you about giving." I don't think Jesus was doing that. I think Jesus legitimately was moved, his heart was moved by this poor lady who had given in all that she had. And he called his disciples over, and he said, "You guys see this? Do you see what this lady did? All these people putting into the treasury box out of their abundance, they're giving out of their abundance, but she gave everything that she had down to the last penny, literally. And she's giving more than anybody else." Now, here's the context for this. Just before Jesus said this, Mark records this. "And in his teaching, he said, 'Beware of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes, and they like greetings in the marketplaces, and have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses. For a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation.'" That word for devour is kind of important. It's 2 words sandwiched together, and it literally means to eat down. To eat down, or to tear away, to bring to nothing, to the point of no return. It's a term that was used when locusts would devour the crops. They would eat them down. They would chew them down until there was nothing left, and the crops were unrecoverable. And Jesus is saying, watch out for those people who devour the widows' houses. The widows are already poor. They're already disadvantaged. They're already marginalized. And he's saying, watch out for these religious leaders who love to stand with their long robes. They stand out in the public. They have these long prayers. They have the best seats in the synagogues, the places of honor at feasts. But they're actually devouring widows' houses. They're robbing from people who are already poor. And for a pretense, for show, they make these long prayers. They, the scribes, will receive the greater condemnation than who? The widows, who Jesus mentions here. I want to look at a couple articles here because I think this is really important. I need to refresh this so it does my updates. I made a couple adjustments to this. Here's an article that is a pretty recent article. I think this is from this year. Yep, from March 22 of this year. Preachers and their $5,000 sneakers. Why one man started an Instagram account showing church's wealth. I'll just read the first paragraph. From his couch in Dallas, Ben Kirby began asking questions about the lifestyles of the rich and famous pastors. Those words shouldn't even go together. Rich and famous pastors. When he was watching some worship songs on YouTube on a Sunday morning in 2019, while listening to a song by Elevation Worship, a megachurch based in Charlotte, the evangelical churchgoer noticed the lead singer's Yeezy sneakers were worth nearly the amount of his first rent check. Kirby posted to his 400 followers on Instagram, "Hey, Elevation Worship, how much you paying your musicians that they can afford $800 kicks? Let me get on the payroll." Kind of a good point, isn't it? You have these people who are fleecing people who are poor into giving all that they have, not like this widow, but they're actually preying on people like her, right? They're preying on people, telling them to give all that they have, and they pad their pockets and they're living this lavish lifestyle. Here's another article that I think is really important from BBC News. The preachers getting rich from poor Americans. And I'm going to read just a couple paragraphs from this. This was from 2019. Yeah, May 2019. It sounds simple, Absurdly so, but Kuntz knows his audience extremely well. He broadcasts on Christian cable channels, often late into the night, drawing in viewers who lack financial literacy and are desperate for change. I understand the laws that govern insurance, stocks, and bonds, and all that's involved in Wall Street, he once said, looking directly into the camera. God has called me as a financial deliverer. Crucially, he always refers to the money as a seed, a $273 seed, a $333 seed, a turnaround seed, depending on the broadcast. If viewers, quote-unquote, plant one, the amount will come back to them multiplied, he says. It's an investment in their faith and their future. And then it tells the story of this guy. That's the fleecer right there. And then they tell the story of this guy. This guy had a daughter who was really sick. He owned a company, and both of his cars, his personal car and his company car, broke down, and they were irreparable. This guy's daughter was really sick with, I forget what the disease was, but if I remember, she needed a transplant or something. He took one of the cars to a junkyard. He got $600 from the junkyard. He watched this televangelist, and he was really moved because this guy was very convincing. And it was these two amounts, and the guy ends up writing two different checks that equaled, guess what amount? $600. Well, his daughter got sicker, and the seed money didn't replicate like it was promised. And he was now desperate for help. And he had given money, they estimated $20,000 over the course of his years to all these different televangelists. And he said, I felt this personal connection to them because they were writing back. I would call the hotlines and people would talk to me. They would answer the phone and they would call me by my first name and tell me how much they cared for me and how much they were praying for me. And they were praying for my daughter. So he wrote back to them and he asked them to help. He said, I'm actually desperate and my daughter needs a transplant and I don't have the money to do this. And every single one of them wrote back and they all wrote different bills. They said, well, if we start giving to you, we'll have to give to everybody who writes in. Other people talked about how their ministry wouldn't allow them to give to other people. They didn't have these ministries to help people in need. And meanwhile, their rich pastors are wearing these fancy clothes and the $5,000 shoes. I want to read one more from this, and I think this is really important. This guy here, his name is Ole Anthony, and he's a watchdog. He contacted the media, he contacted all kinds of people trying to get people to pick up on these stories of all these televangelists who are ripping people off and driving people into deeper poverty. Exactly what Jesus described when he said, beware of the scribes because they eat down these widows' houses. They devour them to make themselves richer and to make themselves better. It was during these sessions that Ole started to note a common thread. When people were on the verge of homelessness in the heart of the Bible Belt, a surprising number offered the last of their cash to televangelists who promised them financial salvation. Ole, who always had a have-to-go approach to problem solving, felt an urge to step in. First, he tried approaching the ministries on behalf of the penniless donors, thinking he could explain the circumstances and get the money refunded. However, like Larry, he found no one willing to talk. So he took it to a Christian Broadcasting Association, but it didn't want to get involved. Then he approached local district attorneys who explained that many preachers were protected by the First Amendment, guaranteeing freedom of religion and free speech. So there was nothing they could do. So he turned back to the media, this time the major networks and publications, which said investigations would be too time-consuming. Guys, I've faced this repeatedly. I know multiple investigative reporters. I've reported things to police. I've reported things to all kinds of different branches of law enforcement. And you know what they say when it comes to religion? It's not a crime to be a cult leader. It's unethical, it's terrible, it's awful, it ruins people's lives, but we can't touch religious people. Isn't that crazy? This is exactly what Jesus is describing. So he's telling his disciples, beware. Beware of these scribes. They like to walk around in long robes. They're rich. They like their greetings. They like the public eye. They like to be out in the open. They like people coming to them, bowing to them, giving them recognition. But they devour widows' houses, and for a pretense, they make long prayers. Do you think Jesus' disciples got it? Right? We're talking about equipping the saints for works of ministry. That's our whole theme for this year. Jesus was equipping his disciples for works of ministry. Do you think they got it after he called them over to look at this widow? Let me go back and read it again. And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums. And a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make up a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on. Do you think at this point the disciples would say something like, Jesus, how do we stop this corruption? How do we stop people from ripping off the widows? How do we step in and help widows? How do we personally give of our own means and help widows? How do we help those who are being destroyed, who are losing their houses, who are living out on the street? How do we help them, Jesus? How can we help our neighbors? Do you think that would be a proper response? I do. I think if I were sitting there and I watched this woman give the very last of her money, which is nothing, I'd say, Jesus, how do we help people like her? But that wasn't their response, was it? Here's their response. Immediately, the very next verse, this is what Mark records. And as he came out of the temple, having just painted this scene, as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings. That's where their minds went. And Jesus said to him, do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. What he's saying is, you see all this? This is going to be destroyed, which happened not many years later. AD 70 is when the temple was destroyed. The Romans came in, they waylaid Jerusalem, and they knocked all these stones down at the temple. They obliterated the temple. But their focus was where? Right? Their focus was on material things. They walked outside, having seen all these people putting these big sums of money in the temple treasury, which built the temple, and all these big, white, magnificent stones. That's where the disciples' mind was. Not, my goodness, look at this poor widow who is absolutely living in desperation. That's not where their mind was. And so, my message today is, sometimes we get caught up in the glamour of life. Our own life, our own lifestyle, our own materialism. Sometimes we get caught up in that and we forget about people who are being devoured. They're out there. There are people right now who are being absolutely annihilated by Christians. Even in this town, there are people being taken advantage of who are disadvantaged. So my message is, maybe we need to recalibrate and have an awareness of people who are struggling and suffering. I'm proud to say that I serve at a congregation where I think we have several people like this widow in this story. She's the hero of the story. We have people here who are living in extreme poverty, who they give out of their poverty. You guys give because you want to give, and you don't give to pad the treasury, and you don't give to get recognition. You guys give because you see needs in other people's lives. Today we're going to take up a special contribution for the Campbells. The Campbells are coming here next week. They'll be here, they're arriving probably Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. As they come back to the United States, they, unlike me, who gets a salary, most ministers here in the States, stateside, we receive salaries, they rely on the good graces of other people. When they come back, they don't get vacation, they fundraise. That's their quote-unquote vacation when they come back to the States. They hold their hand out and they're asking people for money. I'm proud to serve at a congregation where we try to make their visit here at least feel like a vacation. We've done this for several years now. We give to help them. All of that money goes to lessen that blow for them, for traveling funds, for taking their family out for ice cream. That's stuff that is not part of their budget. They don't get help with that stuff. So we're going to be able to bless them here in a little bit. And let's just remember people who are less advantaged than we are. And let's really look at them and notice them and help them out. If there's somebody this morning who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, we would encourage you to come up. Or if you have any prayer needs, you can do that as well as we all stand and sing.